This is the VB Dynamic Controls at Runtime video. Not only will we be adding dynamic controls at runtime, we'll also create an array of controls. The reason I chose to start with the controls at runtime, or adding controls dynamically to your forms, is that in the following series of videos, I'll be adding these controls dynamically this way. So you have one place to look for the settings of the properties of these controls, and that will be in your code. As you can see, I'm using Visual Basic 2010 Express for these examples. So let's get started. Let's open a new project. We'll name it Dynamic Controls at Runtime. It opens up and has a form. We'll double-click on the form to move to the code editor. This will also set up an empty form load event for us. We're going to start off with an array size. This is going to be an integer that's going to determine the size of the array of controls that we'll be using later. Next, my label. That is going to be an array of labels. Then my text box. Again, you can see that's being declared as a text box, and that will also be an array. My notice label. This will be a single label. My timer text box. This is going to be a single text box. My button. Again, a single button. My timer. And I1 as an integer. We'll use this as increments in our timer. In the form load event, we're going to add 3 different subroutines. These routines will be called each time the form loads. You can see from the blue wavy lines underneath that we're having errors right now, and that's simply because we haven't created these subroutines yet. Our first subroutine is configure form. This is just going to configure the size and add some text to the title bar. You'll notice here that I forgot to take out one of my comments, and I'm not actually going to show you what happens if you use form 1, but 2 reasons to not use it. One reason is the me allows this to be copied to any form and work without alteration. The other reason to not use the actual name of the form is it doesn't work. Evidently it doesn't like talking about itself in the third person. So with me means the form. We're going to set the width, the height, and then the text. The text is going to be what's in your title bar. Now we'll comment out the other 2 calls to the subroutines that we haven't created yet so that we can actually run this. And there you see the form resized, and we also want to make sure that we have enough room on that size of a form for our text to appear on the title bar, which we do. So it's looking good here. Now we'll go back in and uncomment those calls to the other subroutines and continue on. Okay, next we'll make our dynamic array of controls subroutine. In this section we're going to set the size of the array for our controls. Now we're going to build a for loop to loop through our array of controls. The first control that we're going to put in this loop is our labels. Right off the bat, we set the element of the myLabel array to a new label. Then using the with statement, we'll set the properties of this control. First, name. You'll notice that I'm going to name the control the same as my array element. This isn't necessary, and we have to understand that myLabel array element is a variable, and the name is actually the name of the control. In this case, we're going to name both the same, but it's not necessary. Next, the text in the label is going to be the same as the name of the label. Visible, we want to be able to see this. We'll set that to true. And now we're going to set the location of the label on the form and the width of the label. We're also going to align the text in the label. We're also going to use the AddHander. This is going to add a click event in this case, so that when the label is clicked on, we will go to the click event for this label, and in this case it's going to be handled by a subroutine that we're going to make called myMessage. And from the blue wavy line you see underneath it, this routine hasn't been made yet. We'll make it later. We end the with, and then we commit this label to the form. Now we'll set the element of the array for the text box. Using the with, we'll name the text box, we'll position the text box so far down, and then we'll also position the text box to the left of the label. We'll add some numbers to the text box, and also make an add handler for the click event on this text box, which again will display the message, the same subroutine that the label is going to use. We end the with, and then commit the text box to the form. We'll loop through each control until we reach the end of the array. Okay, we're not going to be able to run this until we fix that error of the myMessage call up there. So let's make our myMessage sub, and we're going to add in some stuff that you're probably familiar with when you double click on a control and it takes you into the click event or something, and that's the by value sender as system object and by value e as system event. All we really want here is the sender. The sender gives information about the element that brought you to this sub. In our case, it will either be the text box that was clicked on or the label that was clicked on. And we can get a lot of information about the sender who brought us to this subroutine. In this case, we'll get the name of the sender, the height, the width, and the type of control that brought me here. And then we'll display this information in a message box. You'll notice in my message I'm using the underscore as line breaks. I find this more readable, even though I know we don't have to do this anymore. So what we're going to end up doing here is displaying the name of the control that brought us here, the height of the control, the width of the control, and the type of control. So let's see how it works. But before we can do this, we're going to have to comment out the dynamic control call on the form load. And when we click on the text box, we get a message box that pops up that tells us the name of the box, the type of control that it is, the height of the control, and the width of the control. Okay, now we'll work on the dynamic controls subroutine. First, we'll set myNotice label to a new label. One thing I will mention here is that while we have the ability to declare variables and set them on the same line in Visual Basic now, when working with controls, I highly suggest that you avoid this. Break your sections apart, declare and set in different sections. What will happen is eventually you're going to run into an error where your control isn't set or hasn't been declared. If you see this and you read through your code and you can see that it's on one line that you've declared it and set it, just break those apart into different lines and this error is going to go away. So my suggestion is, when working with controls, do not declare and set a control. Do it on separate lines. And name the label, position it from the top, and position it from the left. We'll let it do auto size so that it automatically fits whatever text is in it, and then we'll set the text for the message. We'll add the AddHander, which again will use the myMessage subroutine. We'll end the with, and we'll commit the label to the form. Now we're going to set the myTimer text box to a new text box. We're going to use the with myTimer text box and give it a name, position it from the top and from the left. We're going to size this text box, give it the ability to have multiple lines, and add a scroll bar to it. We're then going to put 0 with a space after it in the text box. And again, add a handler for the click event calling the myMessage subroutine that we've made before. We end the with, and then we commit the control to the form. Now we're going to set the myButton variable as a new button. Use WithMyButton to name the button, position it from the top, position it from the left, define the width, and put the text on the button. We use another AddHander for a click event, but this time we're going to use the myButton click event. Again, blue wavy line because we haven't defined it yet. We end the with, we commit the button to the form. Now we set the myTimer as a new timer. Using with, we set the enabled property to false. And we set the intervals of when it's going to fire. We use the AddHander to add a tick. That's each time it fires. And we're going to have another subroutine called the myTimer tick, which again isn't declared, and so we have a blue wavy line. And we end the with. Now, I want you to notice that I'm not going to commit this to the form because timers technically aren't on the form. In fact, in the graphical display of Visual Studio now, you'll notice like in the old days when you added a timer, there was a graphic on the form for that. Nowadays, we don't even add it to the form because it does behave slightly different than controls that are put on the form. Let's make the subroutine for myTimer tick. And if you're having trouble trying to figure out the syntax for these subroutines, one of the easiest ways to do it would just be to put a button on a form, double click on it, which will take you to the click event, and simply copy the private sub myButton.click event. Same thing for this timer. If you drop a timer on, double click on it, it will bring you to the tick event, and you can see the way the syntax is supposed to be laid out. Anyway, we're going to use our I1 variable that we declared at the very beginning of our form because we don't want this variable to die once this tick event goes away. So using this I1 that was made outside of the subs means that it will stay alive until the form goes away. We're going to add to the I1 variable one increment at a time. So each time this fires, the I1 will be one higher than it was before it fired. In the myTimer text box, we will add the new value of I1 plus a space. First, the text box will start off with a 0. Then, the next time the timer fires, it'll have a 0, space 1. The time after that, when it fires, it will have a 0, space 1, space 2, and so on until you stop the timer from firing. And now we're going to build our myButton click event. We're going to test to see if the text on the button is start timer or stop timer. If it's start timer, then we're going to set the myTimer.enable to true, which will start the timer. If it is not start, then we'll set the myTimer.enable to false, which will stop the timer. Pretty simple little routine. This also took care of all of our errors down in the error list. And we have a complete program. Let's see how it works. Okay, there's our form size, the size we want it, with the title in the title bar that we want. We have a label at the top letting us know what to do. We have labels down the side next to text boxes. We have another text box that can handle multiple lines, plus we'll have a scroll bar in it, and we have a button on there. If we click on the label at the top, it informs us what its name is, what it is, and its size and width, or its height and width. If we click in the text box to the right, we get its name, type, height, and width. If we click the button, we see the timer firing and adding to the text box. Once the text box gets full, we see the scroll bar appear. Now we'll stop the timer. Well, that's it for dynamic controls at runtime. I hope you find it useful. If you don't have any need for this in your own projects, it will be useful in the following video series, as I will be using dynamic controls so that we have one place to find the settings for all of our controls. As always, I'm open to constructive criticism. I'm not a programmer by trade, and if you have any suggestions, I'll be glad to hear them. If I'm not keeping up with the most current techniques, I also like to hear it. So please don't hesitate to leave comments, and I'll see how I can incorporate them into the video.